Hi, I'm Kenney Potter, editor for ECS Publishing Group, and I'm excited to be with Donald Nally today. We have a new series that we are kicking off called the Donald Nally Contemporary Voices series. And so, Donald, welcome.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Donald, why don't you begin by sharing a little bit about this series? What's the vision? What's the purpose for this series?
My group, The Crossing, and I individually do a lot of commissioning. And there's a number of works that I love that tell the stories of our world, what's happening right now, making a record of the time, basically, that I kind of look at it like we were here and this is what it felt like to be here. I would love to see more people know about these works and sing these works. There's a kind of two types of composers' ways of making livings. And one of them is, through a lot of octavo sales, and the other is through commissioning pieces that are kind of larger. And I tend to work with composers who are more on relying on the commissioning. I would love to see those two worlds come together from both sides. And so publishing shorter works from those composers in octavos is the path to that.
No, absolutely. And I've had the pleasure of reviewing these pieces, and I can concur that these pieces are accessible and challenging, of course, but within reason and very accessible. Can you highlight some of these first pieces that we're going to be releasing?
Yeah, I think the first, which is probably the kind of easiest to sing, is Nicholas Klein's "She Took His Hand," and that piece was commissioned for a concert I was doing about immigration and refugeeism, and it is a text that appeared in the Washington Post telling a story of immigration activist who was being deported, talking to her son and saying it's going to be okay. We're, trust this. And so we thought this would be a great text to make a little piece of music out of it. And it's turned out to have legs. I mean, we've sung it a lot because it's a very minimal piece. It's in 4 parts, and it just presents the text in a very direct manner. But underneath it is this really impactful emotion that you can feel at work the whole time. And it's I just love it. I feel like it does tell a story that we're all engaged in every day in the United States. So that's the first one. There's also Vanessa Lan. Vanessa is a composer, American composer from New York, actually, who lives in the Netherlands. We asked her to write one of our carols after a plague, and these were called carols after a plague because we wanted composers. This is backing up a year and a half ago now. We invited 12 composers to write new, more relatively brief works that responded to what they felt like was a contemporary carol, and what they also felt was a plague that they wanted to talk about in music. So that didn't mean just the obvious, where we were right deep in the pandemic. It could be all of the other plagues that we deal with every day, and we just kind of live with, gun violence and racism and poverty and, wealth inequality and all that kind of stuff. And so the various composers took various paths, and Vanessa did decide to choose a Matthew Arnold poem that responds or that is relevant to the topic of grief and hope from the actual pandemic that we were living through. And it's really great. It's a poem that's a grief poem of a friend of Matthew Arnold's, but there's a voice in the poem that's saying, don't live just inside that grief, but look beyond it. And it actually winds up being very hopeful. And Vanessa's piece is super hopeful. It has these, it reaches up. It has these 2 moments where it kind of blossoms like flower into this great moment of hope. And it's really moving. Shall I talk about the third piece?
Sure.
The third piece is from a much larger work called The Ark in the Sky by Kyle Smith. And Kyle wrote a full concert-length piece for us a number of years back on poetry of Robert Lax. And Robert Lax, you know, is like this very complex poet, spiritual person. He was good friends with Thomas Merton, and he wound up living in a Greek island for a number of his last years by himself. He wasn't necessarily a hermit, but he kind of, people would take pilgrimages to go to visit him. And he has a really beautiful way of looking at the world that we live in, and both rejoicing and celebrating it, but also lamenting it. And for Robert Lax, it's very much tied to his own spirituality as well, and you can feel that. So this poem, this piece is called Jerusalem, and it is a really interesting poem in which Jerusalem is talked about back and forth almost fluidly, you know, or I should say fluidly, as a thing that is strong and flourishing, and a thing that is dying or has died. So the very opening line is a reading of lovely Jerusalem, lovely ruined Jerusalem, you know, and it's like, it's almost, it comes at you, that word ruined comes at you as such a shock, right? Like, it doesn't, what? Oh, I thought we were going in a different direction. And the whole poem is that way. It keeps alternating these ideas, and you really get into deep into a thought about civilization, or just Jerusalem itself, and its complex history. And Kyle said it in this almost a dance, you know, it lilts along, it kind of hovers for quite a while, and then it builds up to this great climax. And the climax has both that angst and that joy, you know, that amazing thing about human beings where we're like, you know, we only experience, you know, heightened joy because we understand heightened grief, you know. It's all compacted into these emotional contexts in this piece. So yet again, another piece, you know, obviously we want to publish pieces I love. So yet another piece that I really love.
Absolutely. And from my perspective, what I find as a conductor of a university choir, as well as a choir that's a community group that's really strong musicians, these pieces fit really, really well. And so I hope that folks look to this new series as an opportunity to support new music being written, music that I find, and I think you and I both, and the performers find very relevant to today's society. So thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to add?
No, you just said it all. Like, you know, I'm just interested in telling stories. I think that what we do as choral musicians is tell stories. And I feel really fortunate that the stories that we're going to tell in this series are our stories.
Beautifully said. Well, Donald, thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope everybody looks forward to these pieces as well as pieces in the future.
Thank you.